let me see if I get this right. I walk up and you say, "Oh." Is that how it's going to be today? Fair enough. We've been talking a little bit about the principles of storytelling and screenwriting and how those relate to theology and life. And I think that one of the main things that we've been learning is that at its most basic level, a story is about a hero who wants something and who overcomes conflict in order to get it. That is the fundamental structure of a story. If you don't have a hero, and if the hero doesn't want something, and if the hero isn't willing to overcome conflict in order to get that something, then you simply don't have a story. And with that latter point in mind, this morning I want to focus a little bit on the importance of conflict. There is no such thing as a great story without great conflict. In every story that works, the hero has to overcome something. No conflict, no story, no exceptions. Now, in storytelling and screenwriting, there are four main types of conflict. The first and most common is, of course, man against man. So this is the classic hero versus villain, good guy versus bad guy style of conflict. And we can no doubt think of hundreds of movies that would fit into this category. James Bond, Jason Bourne, John McClane, John Wayne, Jack Reacher, Captain Jack Sparrow. Those are just the J's, man versus man. It's a classic technique and it works very well. Another type of conflict that we see slightly less of is man against society. So this is the type of movie where the hero has to fight against a system, or against an institution, or against an idea. The Matrix would be a great example of this, so would the Hunger Games. Then my least favourite type of conflict is man against nature. I really hate those films, don't you? Twister, Tornado, Volcano, Volcano 2, Super Volcano, Volcano in New York, Miami Magma. They're all the same. The hero is pitted against the natural elements in a fight for survival. And then the final, I think, most interesting type of conflict that we see in movies is man against self. So these are stories in which the hero has to overcome the quirks and the limitations of his own body, or his own character, or his own circumstances in order to get what he wants. For example, in, think of an example, Russell Crowe. Remember that film where he plays a mathematical genius, A Beautiful Mind? Well, in that film, he has to overcome his own schizophrenia in order to get what he wants. And what he wants is to have a good family and a good career, and so on. And I like those stories. I think they're very interesting, very compelling. And as you hear about the four types of conflict that are most commonly used in the movies, you've probably already selected the ones which most readily resonate with you. What is the main conflict in your life at the moment? Is it with people? Is it with the system? Is it with nature? Is it with yourself? Or is it all of the above? Where is the battleground upon which your future defeat or victory will be decided? It's good to know, because all stories need the opposition of forces. There needs to be an antagonist that opposes us. And we, loving comfort as we do, dislike moments of opposition in life, and quite rightly, do not seek them out. We, unlike the brave, seek comfort in the well-lit avenues of life, far from danger and hardship. And yet, regardless of how disinterested we are in seeking out conflict, conflict, it seems, has more than a passing interest in seeking us out. One of the most notable characteristics of our culture is that we're very interested in making ourselves happy. The make yourself happy business is big business. We will eagerly consume any article or seminar or book, or indeed religious teaching, that purports to show us the methodology by which we might achieve a a much happier life. More than we want anything, we want to be happy. And we want it so badly that we don't know how to think through the issues of conflict and struggle. In fact, we don't want to think about those things at all. And I would suggest to you that you can go ahead and live in that kind of bubble if you want to. So go ahead, think positively, eat healthily, monitor your blood pressure, limit your caffeine intake, take baths in seaweed whilst listening to dolphins singing arias, wash your hair in jojoba and rub your face in Himalayan goji berries. And regardless of every step that you think you're taking towards a happier life, sooner or later, you will suffer. Sooner or later, the great conflicts of life will seek you out. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when, and for how long, and how bad will it be. And it seems to me that in the church of all places, we should not be embarrassed about saying that life is hard. Because life is hard. And its hardness is reflected in the scriptures. For example, the songbook of the Bible, the book of Psalms, is full of the poetry of pain and despair. And we're going to look at that in our next series called Pain Management, starting next week. There's a whole book in the Bible called the Book of Lamentations. And as the title suggests, it's rather grim and depressing. The Bible is very honest and open about the things that oppose us, and we should be too. Suffering is a fact of life. But if suffering is inevitable, and it is, the way we respond to it is not. And the big idea in this morning's lesson that I'm going to try and teach you is that suffering shouldn't always be rejected as an unusual, certainly, and perhaps even an unwelcome occurrence, for that would be a waste of time. Rather, it should be embraced as an opportunity. It should be seen as nothing more than a chapter in a larger story, and that story matters. It matters so much that it's worth turning the page again and again, and it's worth keeping going with the story until the very last page of the very last chapter. This big idea that I'm going to try and teach you comes from Paul's letter to the church in Philippi. And in chapter 1 and verse 12, he writes, "Okay, folks, so I want you to know." This phrase that he uses here, "I want you to know," is only ever used in ancient letters when the person writing the letter wants the person who's reading the letter to understand that the knowledge is now getting personal and intimate. So for example, you get an email from your sister in Timmins, and she says in the email, "Okay, so I've told you that it's snowing up here in Timmins, and I've told you that my husband's just gotten a new job, and I've told you that my daughter just started a new course in college. I've told you all those things that are going on in my life. Now there's something else I want you to know." So we're taking the conversation deeper now, more intimate now. "I want you to know that I found a lump in my breast. The doctor said it doesn't look all that good." Okay? So this phrase, "I want you to know," in an ancient letter means we're now taking the conversation much deeper, much more personal. So what Paul is saying here is, I want you to know something about me. I want to let you into my mind, into my personality, into my character, into my story. I want you to see the real me. And what I want you to see is that all of the things that have happened to me have served to advance the gospel. Now, when he talks about the things that have happened to him, he is, of course, referring to the great conflicts of his life. Let me read you just a selection of those in his own words. On one occasion, writing to a church in Corinth, he says, "We do not want you to be uninformed about the hardships we suffered. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired even of life." I had a phase in my life just like that, he says. It was so bad, I didn't think I'd make it, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. Elsewhere, he says of himself, I've worked hard, I've been in prison, I've been flogged, I've been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received the 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and day on the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger. I've laboured and toiled and I've gone without sleep. I've known hunger and thirst and I've often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. In other words, guys, I've had lots of occasion to look at my life and accurately conclude that life is hard. I've struggled against people. I've struggled against the system. I've struggled against nature. I've struggled against myself. And any right-thinking, positive-minded, gym-going, goji berry-eating person would reject all of those circumstances as being rather bothersome interruptions to the normal business of life. But not Paul. Perverse as he is, he embraces suffering as an opportunity, as an interesting chapter in an overall story. And that, despite the perversity, seems eminently sensible. After all, if you're going to suffer anyway, then you may as well make something of it. So notice that he says, what has happened to me, all this bad stuff, has actually served to advance the gospel. Now, the word advance in that sentence is a word that was only ever used in the ancient world by soldiers. It was a first century soldiering word that would be used in a context something like this. A general would take his army to an impassable geographical feature, say a river. And faced with this impassable geographical feature, he would turn to his engineers and say, my army is at this impassable feature. So find a way for my army to cross this river. Go and find a ford, and if you can't find a ford, build me a bridge so that we can pass over this impassable river. Do you understand? To advance, in first century soldier speak, is to pave the way for others. To blaze a trail that could not otherwise be blazed. So what Paul is thinking about in verse 12 is that his suffering has made the impossible possible. It has raised possibilities to a new and higher level. Conflict does this. It takes your story to a place that would otherwise have been impossible. Now that is, of course, a rather counterintuitive thing to say, and perhaps equally counterintuitive to hear. When we struggle, we feel that the pause button has been hit on life. We feel that the story of our life that we would like to be good has been interrupted, perhaps irreparably, perhaps never to be the same again. And so it needs saying that for many people, the conflicts and the struggles of life, however unwelcome, were the very things that took them to a place where they would not, in the absence of such conflict and struggle, ever have been able to go. If it hadn't been for the bad chapters in the middle of the story, the fates would never have aligned to make the good chapters at the end of the story possible. It's a horrible thought, I know. I hate to say it, and I hesitate to say it. But you might need the conflict. You might need the thing that so horribly opposes you at present. And it may be the case, I hope it is the case, that in the days and years ahead, the unfolding of your story will eventually allow you to understand why. At this particular point in the early history of the church, people, you're going to think I'm joking when I say this, but I'm deadly serious. People thought that Christians were a weird criminal sect who ate people. I'm serious. People thought that Christians were cannibals. There was a lot of confusion going on about the Lord's Supper, you know, that bit where eat my body and drink my blood. Well, some people in society heard about this and thought, oh, Christians keep body parts in the fridge. Maybe some do, I don't know. But that's what people thought. And so Christians had a rather bad name. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing at the time, said that Christians are a sect in society who are hated for their abominations. And this hatred in the first century was particularly keenly felt at the higher levels of society. So people who worked in government jobs high up, people who lived in palaces and castles, were all highly suspicious of Christians, and the word on the street was, Christians eat babies. That's what they do. So when Paul says that my sufferings have advanced the gospel, what he means is that following his arrest some, I think, 5 years earlier, and subsequent imprisonment in a place called Caesarea, which is the capital of the Roman province of Palestine, in that prison, in that capital, he's had the opportunity to explain the Christian faith to successive heads of that government. And this has advanced the gospel because he's been able to say, guys, look, okay, let's just talk about the whole body parts in the fridge issue, okay? We don't do that. A Christian is a person who believes in Jesus, believes that he said certain things, that he died a certain death, rose a certain resurrection, and if you believe that, it will have certain consequences and results in your life. That's what a Christian is. We don't eat babies, honestly. Never have. Never even thought about it. And so this advances the gospel. And then after being in prison in Caesarea for a few years, he is then transferred from there to Rome, where he becomes an imperial prisoner. So he's in the palace at the heart of the Roman government. And of his incarceration there, he says, it has become clear to everyone throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I'm in chains for Christ. So here's my story. Life is hard. I got arrested. Bummer for me. I then spent 2 years in a Palestinian jail. Bummer for me. Then I was transferred to another jail in Rome. And here I am. And there's all this suffering, and there's all this pain in my life. But notice again, rather than rejecting the pain and the hardness of life as being a bothersome interruption to the business of life, he embraces it as an opportunity. May as well make something of it while I'm here. May as well not give in to despondency. May as well choose to see purpose in all this. May as well choose to hang on to hope. I'm here anyway. Whatever I feel isn't going to make too much of a difference to the fact I'm here in a prison cell, so I may as well make something of it. And I've made so much of it that the 9,000 men of the Praetorian Guard who guard the emperor have seen something of Jesus in me. And the people who work in the Roman administration have seen something of Jesus in me. And so consequently, these people who hitherto at the height of society believed all these negative things about the Christian faith have begun to see an alternative view. And it's been rather positive. Furthermore, he says, because of my chains, like chains, this is not good. This is not good. May as well make something of it, though. Most of the brothers in the Lord have been encouraged to speak the word of God more courageously and fearlessly. Rome in the first century, as I'm sure you've heard, was a rather tough gig for a Christian. This was the era in which Christians were beginning to be fed to the lions. They were beginning to be viewed as criminals within society. And so naturally, as a Christian in Rome in the first century, you keep it kind of quiet. You don't talk about Jesus all that much, at least not in public. But when they heard that Paul was brave, they too became brave and started to tell their friends and neighbours something about who they were and what they believed. Something that we all need to realize when life is hard is that the bravery of one inspires the bravery of many. One of the lines that most frequently occurs in citations for the Victoria Cross goes something like this. It says, "These actions were an inspiration to all who saw them." In the few thousand Victoria Cross citations that have been written in the past 100 and so years, this line is the line that most commonly appears. These actions were an inspiration to all who saw them. Inspirational bravery. If you can go through your disappointments well, let's just pause on that sentence. You're going through disappointments. Nothing you can do about it. So you may as well go through them well. Any flaws in the logic? None that I can see. And if you go through them well, going through them well inspires others in ways you cannot imagine. Never forget that when you're going through it, other people are watching you go through it. And therefore the manner in which you go through it matters. Ease inspires no one. Dogged perseverance in the face of adversity inspires everyone. Your children need you to go through it well. Your friends, your colleagues, your neighbours, people you barely know, need you to go through it well. They need you to dig deep and find the strength and the courage that you need to make it just a little bit longer, to go just a little bit further, to try just a little bit harder. Paul, for his part, seems rather pleased about the effect that his particular example was having on the church. So my life is hard, yes, but my stand in its hardness has inspired the rest of the Christians in Rome to talk more openly about who they are and what they believe. Then he says something rather strange. He says, "It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so in love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I am in chains." It's one of the darkest sentences in the New Testament, I think. It seems that some of the Christians that he knew were doing the whole Jesus thing and were talking about the whole Jesus thing, but they were doing it in such a way, and certainly with such a motive, that was designed to heap trouble on Paul's already troubled situation. Now, Paul makes it clear that these troublesome people are not false teachers. They're not saying anything untrue. So they're saying things like, believe in Jesus, and Jesus is cool, and Jesus said certain things, and died a certain death, and rose a certain resurrection that will have certain consequences in your life if you believe it and follow it. So they correctly want to verbalize all that, but worryingly, the reason that they're doing so is, at least in part, so that they might stir it up a little bit for this poor guy who's in prison. The words envy and rivalry and the phrases selfish ambition and stir up trouble are all very dark New Testament words that have to do with the business of spoiling someone else's life. So whoever these people were, they were doing the right thing, but for the wrong reason. They were talking about their faith and about their ministry in such a way as designed to make Paul either look bad or feel bad or both. But they didn't know the measure of the man. In verse 18 he says, what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or good, Christ is preached, and because of this I rejoice. I rejoice not in spite of what they're doing. It's not like that. I'm just genuinely happy that people are inspired to talk about their faith. And that's why he says, you might want to talk about Jesus in such a way that's designed to make me look bad, or to cause me some troubles, or to discredit me, and to annoy me, but you don't know me. Because if you talk about Jesus, I'm for it. And then he says, and I will continue to rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and with the help given by the Spirit of Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. When he uses the word deliverance, he's not thinking about getting out of jail. He's quoting a very well-known verse from the book of Job, and that verse is all about I know that at the moment my life is falling apart. And I know that when you look at me, you see a broken man and a damaged man, a man whose reputation is in tatters, whose faith is in ruins, whose family has fallen apart. I know that when you look at me, you see all of that. But I also know that one day, the God who is my judge will vindicate me. And on that day in the future, I know I'll be all right. So I rejoice, because I know who I am. I've not forgotten. I know that I've not done wrong. I know that I haven't done harm. And I know that one day God will make all that okay. That's what this word deliverance means in the book of Job, and that's why he quotes it the way he does here. Sticking with that train of thought, he then says, I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage, so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. The phrase eagerly expect that he uses there is a very rare Greek phrase. It means something like, I stretch my neck and, like, I'm trying to see you up there, but if I stretch my neck, I might see you a little bit better, is what it means. And what he's stretching his neck to see is, I'm standing on my toes, I'm stretching my neck, and I'm looking into the future of my life. And what I expect in the future, and what I hope for in the future, is that I won't be ashamed. And so I'm getting a picture of myself, he's saying, in heaven on day one. And I'm standing there before God. And I know what everyone else has said about me. I know the ups and the downs of my life. I know all the time I've been in prison, all the time I've been abused and hurt and all that. And, I know what everyone else's judgment has been on me. But here as I stand before God, I'm expecting and I'm hoping that God will judge me fairly. And that he will say to me, you're okay. You've done no wrong. You've lived a good story. It had its bad chapters. It had its dark moments. But your story's been good. Well done. Is kind of what he's getting at here. On page 1 of the Bible, remember, there is paradise. Apples, oranges, naked people. Page 2 of the Bible, there is paradise lost. Final page of the Bible, there is paradise restored. Everything in between is the remains of paradise, the ruins of paradise. And it is in those remains and ruins where you and I have to live our story. So I like this idea. I know I live in the remains of what was meant to be a better life, but as I stretch my neck forward, I hope and I expect that one day paradise for me will be restored, and I will have no regret about the way I've lived thus far. How are we doing for time? Because the Hunger Games starts at 12 and we need to be out sharp. Seriously. Anyone got a watch?
11:25.
Okay, yeah, wrap it up. The oldest book in the Bible is the book of Job. It's a book about suffering. It's a book about a man's life that went wrong, and it's almost as if God is saying in the book, okay, let's get one thing straight, folks. It's going to be bad. It's going to be really bad. Job is essentially a good man to whom bad things happen. And like all men who see such days, he asks why. And like all men, he gets no answers, except this. About halfway through the book, actually towards the end. So the whole book up until this point has been Job's life falls apart, like really falls apart. And then he wonders why it happens. His friends wonder why it happens. You must have done this, you must have done that, blah, 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 blah. And there's all these questions get asked. And then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. Well, that's more than you and I ever get, isn't it? When we go through the storm, it's like nothing. No answers, no explanations, it just happens. So Job is, although the answer he gets isn't much, it's more than we get. Anyway. So the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm, and here's what he said. He said, "Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge?" And then he goes on to talk about the mysteries of life, and it's as though he's saying there are realities in this universe that you don't get to understand. And so he says to Job, "Brace yourself like a man, and I'll question you, and you'll answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Have you ever given orders to the morning, or shown the dawn its place? Have the gates of death been shown you? Have you seen the gates of the deepest darkness? Have you comprehended the vast expanses of the earth?" And he goes on like this for ages and ages. And he doesn't explain to Job ever why he had to suffer. He doesn't explain to Job what the reason was for the stuff he had to go through. He just seems to say, in the big story of this world, it's not all about you. There is a bigger story going on than the one that pertains to your struggles and your conflicts. But within that bigger story, how you live through your struggles and your conflicts matters. It just does. It matters that you choose perseverance over surrender. It matters that you choose hope over despondency. It matters that you don't quit. It matters that you keep going. It matters that you don't forget who you are when all is lost. Why does it matter? It just does. It's important to your story that you don't allow the difficult scenes in the middle to determine excessively the final scenes at the end. Stretch your neck a little. Lift your chin a little. Look into the future and believe in faith that that future is good, worth waiting for, worth struggling for, worth fighting for, worth hoping for. Next week we're going to start a new series called Pain Management. So we're going to look at we're just going to talk about this business of pain and struggling. I thought it would be really perverse to do that at Christmas. It's really why I did it, and don't need a reason. And so for the next 4 weeks we're going to talk about the darkness of life and the struggles of life. And as we talk about it, we're going to find healing, and we're going to get encouragement from one another and get hope. In the meantime, we need to go now because the cinema have an early matinee on. Thank you for coming. God bless you. Keep fighting, keep struggling. See you next week.